Hello there, I'm Enrique and this is News Pulse, the beating heart of the news from Ukraine and for the world. The United States Department has denied plans to lift sanctions against the Russian Federation. This was stated by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the social network X. Well, meanwhile, the United Kingdom has introduced a number of new sanctions against the Russian Federation following the Russian attack on Ukraine on April 24th, as Politico reports. The new measures come into force immediately. Christina Dombrovska will help you to learn more.
Politico information about the possible lifting of sanctions against Russia and the resumption of work of Nord Stream 2 is fiction. This was stated by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the social network X. Earlier, the newspaper reported that the White House is allegedly discussing the lifting of sanctions of Russian assets in Europe, in particular, and from the Russian gas pipeline Nord Stream 2, as part of discussions on ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Neither Steve Witkoff nor I have had any conversations about lifting sanctions against Russia as part of a deal with Ukraine. This is journalistic malpractice. If Politico has an ounce of integrity, they will fully retract this piece of fiction. Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State on social network X.
In its April 23rd article, Politico reported that the main proponent of lifting restrictions on Russia was allegedly President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff. According to the article, Witkoff had instructed his team to compile a list of all U.S. energy-related sanctions against Russia. However, this initiative reportedly found little support within President Trump's team. A source told Politico that both Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who chairs the White House Energy Dominance Council, opposed the idea.
Some in the US government think that Witkoff has been misled by Russia about the extent of the economic opportunity for the US in restoring business ties with Russia. There is an internal White House debate between the energy dominance people from the Politico publication.
And in addition, beyond that headline, I think the immediate thing that Russia will be looking for is lifting of US sanctions. Because Russia is facing a fairly significant economic point in 2025 as to whether it can continue to fund this invasion.
Back in early March, Bild and Financial Times reported that Moscow and Washington were allegedly discussing restarting Nord Stream 2 with the involvement of U.S. investors. However, Politico, citing European diplomats, stressed that the fate of the Nord Stream pipelines should be a strictly European matter. The European Union has consistently reiterated that no sanctions will be lifted from Russia until it ends its war against Ukraine.
In terms of short-term support for Ukraine, we also decided unanimously that this is not the time to lift whatever sanction on Russia, and there will not be a lifting of sanctions before peace is clearly established. And so we plan to continue the economic pressure, especially on the shadow fleet and on some industrial capacities.
It is clear that we are working on the 17th package, also shadow fleet and different elements there to put it together for the Foreign Affairs Council in May.
According to Reuters, the new EU sanctions package may include legislation banning European companies from signing new contracts for Russian fuel. Brussels is also examining legal avenues to break existing gas contracts with Russia, without incurring penalties, according to European diplomats.
With some member states vowing to block any EU sanctions on Russian gas, the Commission is instead looking at other tools that could hasten the end of Europe's reliance on Russian energy. It plans to set out options for doing this in a roadmap due on May 6, from the Reuters publication.
Meanwhile, on April 24th, the United Kingdom announced 150 new trade sanctions against Russia. According to Politico, the package includes a ban on importing video game controllers used to operate drones. The UK government has also restricted the export of technologies to Russia, including software used for locating and developing new oil and gas fields. UK Minister for Europe, North America, and Overseas Territories, Stephen Dowdy, stated that the country is using all available powers to strangle Russia's war machine and save Ukrainian lives, reported by Christina Dombrovska, UATV News.
President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to South Africa was cut short due to a massive missile and drone attack on Ukrainian land. Nevertheless, in his official telegram, Zelensky thanked the leader of the South African Republic for helping to return Ukrainian children who were illegally deported by Russia. Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha continued meetings with representatives of South Africa. Andrei Dmytrenko will tell you more about the first visit of the President of Ukraine to the Republic of South Africa in more than 30 years.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy described the goal of his visit to South Africa as a step toward uniting the world to increase pressure on Russia. During his meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, the leaders discussed, among other topics, the establishment of a joint hub for transporting agricultural products to the region, as well as deepening cooperation in the fields of security and energy.
Our joint projects in agriculture and other sectors could significantly boost trade between Ukraine and South Africa. Moreover, we can work together to significantly increase electricity generation in your country, from nuclear to renewable energy sources.
But the central focus of the meeting was joint efforts to end Russia's war against Ukraine. President Zelenskyy stated that Kyiv is hoping for cooperation with South Africa as a co-leader of a global coalition focused on the return of Ukrainian children who were illegally deported by Russia.
We began our meeting with President Ramaphosa not by talking about the economy, although that's important, but about how to end the war, how to force a full and unconditional ceasefire. The second topic was not energy security, though that's important as well. It was about the children, the list of children. South Africa has already helped us with this, and we hope that support continues. I gave President Ramaphosa a list of 400 Ukrainian children. This is extremely important to us.
Experts stress that cooperation between Kyiv and Pretoria is particularly significant, as South Africa is one of the leading countries of the Global South. South Africa has the largest economy on the continent and is a member of BRICS. Pretoria attempts to maintain a balance between the West and the East. It did not vote in favor of UN resolutions condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and President Ramaphosa has sought to stay in contact with both Zelenskyy and Putin. Ramaphosa recently also discussed peace initiatives with U.S. President Donald Trump.
I had an opportunity to discuss the peace process in Ukraine with President Trump. We both agreed the war must end as soon as possible to prevent further loss of life and destruction. Earlier this week, I also spoke with President Putin, and we both committed to work toward a peaceful resolution to Russia's war against Ukraine. We urge all parties to ensure a comprehensive and unconditional ceasefire. Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa.
However, it was Russia that nearly disrupted President Zelensky's visit to South Africa by launching a massive attack on Ukraine during the night of April 24th. In a post on social media platform X, Zelenskyy announced he was forced to cancel parts of his visit and immediately return home.
I will brief South African President Ramaphosa, who now holds the chairmanship of the G20, on the situation and our need to intensify global diplomatic efforts. A halt to the strikes is necessary immediately and unconditionally. We are also counting on South Africa's assistance in humanitarian issues. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on social network X.
Zelenskyy also noted that all remaining meetings with South African officials would be carried out by Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha. In a post on X, the diplomat called President Zelenskyy's first visit to South Africa historic. Sybiha also briefed Pretoria on international efforts aimed at ending the war in Ukraine.
I informed Minister Lamola about the peace efforts, including the most recent meetings in Paris and London, and Ukraine's steps toward peace. We want to end this war this year, and we are working with partners to achieve it. We discussed in detail how to advance Ukraine and South Africa's mutually beneficial bilateral partnership, and we are eager to expand cooperation in all areas. Andrei Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on social network X.
Kyiv is making efforts to build stronger ties with African nations. On April 11th, during a visit to Turkey, Foreign Minister Sabiha held meetings with the foreign ministers of Angola, Benin, the Gambia, Côte d'Ivoire, Mozambique, Rwanda, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and Tunisia. According to Sabiha, Ukraine is ready to cooperate with African Union countries, including in areas of trade and economics. Reported by Andriy Mitrenko, UATV News.
Russia may have recruited Chinese technical specialists and obtained combat drone production technologies from them. This was stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. According to him, the Security Service of Ukraine will provide China with brief information on possible Chinese arms supplies to the Russian Federation. In addition, Kyiv has intelligence data on Russia's use of Chinese drone production technologies, which were probably obtained illegally. My colleagues will continue the topic.
It is important for the Chinese government to understand the terms on which Russian partners are working with them, said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Ukrainian intelligence suggests that Moscow may have stolen drone production technology by cooperating with Chinese citizens behind the back of official authorities in Beijing. Evidence of this illegal cooperation is already being passed through diplomatic channels by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sabiha. According to President Zelenskyy, Chinese officials have not contacted him personally. Communication has taken place at the level of embassies and diplomats.
I asked Ukraine's security service to share broader information with the Chinese side regarding Chinese citizens working at a drone production facility in Russia. Based on our data, we believe that Russia may have stolen the technology, possibly after reaching an agreement with these individuals without the knowledge of China's leadership. The documents describe drone-related technologies that appear to match Chinese systems. I think it will be important for Beijing to see how their partners are actually working with them.
On April 22nd, the Chinese ambassador to Ukraine, Ma Shenkun, was summoned to Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Deputy Foreign Minister Yevhen Parabunis urged the Chinese side to take measures to end any support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine.
During the meeting, Deputy Foreign Minister Yevhen Parabunis emphasized that the involvement of Chinese nationals in combat operations against Ukraine on the side of the aggressor state, as well as the participation of Chinese companies in the production of military goods in Russia, raises serious concerns and contradicts the spirit of the partnership between Ukraine and China. Evidence of such activities has been provided to the Chinese side by Ukrainian intelligence services. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine on Telegram.
Meanwhile, Beijing responded to the summoning of its ambassador in Kyiv regarding alleged Chinese support for Russia in the war, dismissing the accusations as groundless.
We have clearly stated China's position on the relevant issues, and China strongly opposes baseless accusations and political manipulation.
On April 17th, President Zelenskyy revealed that Ukraine had obtained information about China supplying military goods to Russia, specifically gunpowder and artillery. Despite strong Russia-China ties, often described by the Kremlin as a strategic partnership, Beijing officially denies selling weapons to Russia. China maintains a neutral stance on the war and continues to call for a negotiated resolution. However, it has not joined the international sanctions against the Russian Federation. On the contrary, since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, China has increased trade and economic cooperation with Moscow. Beijing also denies that Chinese nationals are participating in the war on Russia's side as part of its military forces.
There are many enclaves beyond the Urals where Chinese communities have formed over the years. If some citizens of the China who are currently on Russian territory can be recruited into the Russian army, it wouldn't be an extraordinary case. That's why we must present this issue on all international platforms, because it's clear that Beijing is directly or indirectly helping Moscow.
On April 8th, President Zelenskyy announced that Ukrainian defense forces had captured 2 Chinese nationals in Donetsk region. The individuals were taken prisoner on Ukrainian soil and later provided detailed accounts of how they were recruited into the Russian army and sent to the front. Ukraine has documented these cases of Chinese citizens participating in the war on Russia's side and shared the findings with Beijing. Now, the Chinese government must take action, both toward its own citizens and toward Russia, which is deliberately dragging China into its war against Ukraine and damaging China's reputation across Europe, said Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine. He added that consultations on this matter are currently ongoing between the foreign ministries of Ukraine and China. Reported by Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.
It was Enrique and News Pulse. Goodbye and see you at the next beat.